Hey everyone. So hopefully the mic's working because chat's being a little dodgy. But what I wanted to talk about today is the idea of imposter syndrome. And I think it's something we've talked about before. You'll see that in the AMA video that's coming out soon. Although by the time this gets put out, it'll probably already be out. The fact is that at least to some degree, there is an argument to be made here that I think this is something that everyone deals with at least a little bit. Now, I think for some people, they might call it something different. They might conceive of it differently in their head, but it is something that is, I think, a pretty big issue. The reason for it is, in some ways, and maybe this will sound weird, I look at imposter syndrome as the opposite of the Dunning-Kruger effect. Can someone put the link for Dunning-Kruger and the imposter syndrome in there? Dunning-Kruger effect is the less you know about a thing, the more confident you are you know about it, essentially. And so the problem with the Dunning-Kruger effect is that it essentially means that dumbass people who don't have expertise in a thing sound very, very confident. Like a certain Miss Orchard. Imposter syndrome is a little bit different. And what it basically comes out to is essentially a feeling of being almost a fraud. That meaning is regardless of your actual level of expertise, if you get a job somewhere, let's say, or you are at some level, getting accepted to a school, imposter syndrome is the thing that tells you you didn't get this legitimately. It's the thing that tells you that you are at some level cheating, right? It's the idea that you gamed the system. It's the idea that you must have confused them, befuddled them with your witchcraft, right? So let's go through this because I want to talk about this and then I'll kind of talk about my experience. There we go. Imposter syndrome, also known as imposter phenomenon, imposterism, false fraud syndrome, and the imposter experience, is a psychological pattern in which an individual doubts their skills, talents, and accomplishments and has a persistent internalized fear of being exposed as a fraud. Despite external evidence of their competence, those experiencing this phenomenon remain convinced that they are frauds and do not deserve all that they have achieved. Individuals with imposterism incorrectly attribute their success to luck or interpret it as a result of deceiving others into thinking they were more intelligent than they perceive themselves to be. Yes, absolutely, Hanging Wednesday. That's absolutely, you could describe this as a form of cognitive dissonance, right? So the idea being is that a person, regardless of what is shown to them, right? Regardless of what is at some level given to them, they still view themselves as not competent. Or specifically, yeah? Not really, Tiamat. Sometimes it can just be very generalized, right? Sometimes it can be generalized to the point where it's just you think you're an imposter in all the things. Maybe your partner loves you deeply and tells you all the time, but they suddenly find themselves, maybe you at one point think that maybe you've just befuddled them or confused them, right? How this comes up for me, and I'll explain this kind of in depth, is, so as I've said before on stream, I'm 40 and I'm a kid of the 90s. 90s were not really fucking great far as two things. One, trans representation, otherwise I would have transitioned way fucking sooner. And the 90s really sucked at dealing with one particular phenomenon. That being dealing with special education. And so you might ask yourself, why am I saying this? So my experience is that in a lot of cases, when we're talking about special education in the 90s, what we're talking about is the unfortunate situation where kids, regardless of their actual aptitudes or the disorders they struggle with, are all put together. Now, logistically, this just doesn't make sense because each of these kids has different needs. If you're dealing with autistic children, they have their own needs. If you're dealing with, say, a dyslexic kid, they have different needs than the others. ADHD, Down syndrome. In the 90s, these were all put together, especially in the early 90s and mid 90s. So I was a kid that was diagnosed with ADHD around 4th and 5th grade. And I was a kid that was really not liked much because, unfortunately, a lot of really shitty things happened to me. So what happened is that I ended up internalizing this idea that because I had to go to the special ed classroom and I had to get rewarded to be able to achieve, that I wasn't intelligent, that I was stupid, that I was a some sort of fool. Brittany, that really does suck. I'm sorry. The problem is that my attempts to sort of prove my intelligence didn't really start till later. So a lot of time I just sort of internalized that I was just this dumbass, sort of thinking I was bright, but then like shutting it down immediately. Where I started realizing that maybe I was brighter than I thought was actually in undergrad. I would be in classes sort of putting things together. And part of this came from the fact that A, I associated with people who were super intelligent. B, I also, at some level, had really good language and philosophy to be able to talk about certain things. And 3, most likely, I'm probably a little bit brighter than average. That's not a flex. That's not a thing. It's just a statement of fact. The problem is that when you try to prove to yourself that you're intelligent through grades, that is a losing battle. Particularly, every time I got a good grade, every time I got a really high score, the issue is that it didn't really do anything. Right? Because, well, I had this sudden proof in my hands that I was this, this person with 2 associates. I was this person now with a bachelor's. I was then a person with a master's. And so the problem is that even after I was able to sort of show that, I have like a fucking, I think I graduated my community college with like I want to say like a 3.6 or 3.7. I think I graduated my fucking undergrad class or my bachelor's program with like a 3.4. And then I think I graduated my fucking master's program with like a 3.89. So like, I'm not dumb by any stretch, but there's still a part of me that wonders if I am. I struggle with a lot of stuff. For example, I struggle with a lot of things like reading, right? I don't know what you mean by a PMC mind prison. That I don't understand what that is. Credentialism? I don't understand that term. But from my perspective, the issue I had is that I could talk a good game. I'm pretty eloquent. I can get out a lot of ideas, but if you ask me to sit down and actually read a book about a topic, I struggle with it. I can do an audiobook. I can listen to podcasts. I can do that stuff. But if you actually have me sit down and go through the reading, and the problem is that for a long time, I didn't have audio to do that with. Text-to-voice communicators were not super common, at least for me. And in a lot of cases, it was really hard to actually find a way to deal with the fact that I would have to struggle with things. I think my roommates probably remember this, but there were times where I was walking around with my psychopathology book and having to stand up, walk through, and read it to get my mind focused enough. Oh, Steve Wisp, thank you so much, by the way. But focusing so much that I had to do all these things to make it work. And no, absolutely, reading out loud's a big one for me. Also, there'd be a lot of times we'd be spending time at like a dive fucking, Denny's-esque restaurant, right? Some kind of diner. And I'd be listening to either white noise or like, Lindsey Sterling, or other types of stuff that doesn't have really like lyrics. I really struggled with the idea for a long time that I was dumb. I really struggled with the idea that I was this dumb kid that didn't just get it, didn't understand it, that even as I was finishing my graduate degree, even as I got my license, even as I started working, I was getting rave reviews from clients, even as I transitioned and all of my clients followed me to my new place of work, despite being given the option to stay with the place they were at and possibly get a new therapist. I still believed that this was all just bullshit, that I had just convinced them with good rhetoric, good decisions, good arguments, but nothing about me innately. This is probably also around the time where I started watching a lot of YouTubers and a lot of people because I wanted to make my rhetoric better. A lot of people don't know this, but in therapy, rhetoric matters. Reading for school or work is hard. Actually, reading for me in any context is super hard. Even things I'm interested in. I really suck at it. Not that I can't read. I absolutely can. I've done it on stream a number of times. But it's something about it where it just starts to mind numb me. The reason I have to stand up sometimes is that if you actually look at the data, and I don't know how much this is related to me, but I feel like it is, there is a pretty solid overlap between narcolepsy and ADHD as far as brain structures. And as such, I would find myself in this situation where I would sit down, I would try to read, and I would fall asleep. I would just pass out. Credentialism is the bias that someone must be an expert because they've got degrees, whereas most of the time you need to have so much more on ground experience. So I disagree. So I can see that in business and I can see that in other things. In mental health, I think it's a lot more complicated. The big one for me is the at least as far as my program and programs like it, there is a pretty solid amount of clinical work you get over the course of the last year of your training. So it starts off with the skills-based class where you're like learning about, how to do therapy, and you're usually doing it with the other students. Then there's one where you're doing the work at the clinic there at this college. And then there's eventually one where you're at your internship. So to some degree, by the time you leave for your degree and you have your limited license, you already have a year experience. So at least with my program, I say for counselors, I think that might be a little bit different. That's not to say every counselor that left my program is someone I 100% think is competent. But I do think that, here's the balance I'm always trying to stretch or trying to figure out. I think that we have to be able to accept expertise without it becoming a catch-all, because I don't want to fall into the postmodern trend of thinking all expertise is so contextualized that it doesn't matter. Because that's where a lot of sort of postmodern and a lot of sort of left-leaning stuff goes, is expertise starts not mattering. It starts to disintegrate. It starts to fall apart. And I really dislike that, because what that does is it becomes a way for everyone's opinion to be equal when it's not. That's okay, Andy. That's totally fine. I think it's relevant to bring that up there because I do think people use that as a shield. And I can imagine that somebody in those circumstances could still suffer imposter syndrome. So no worries. So my experience of this is something really difficult because I experienced this on this channel. One of the things I really struggle with and I have a hard time with is that I want you guys to call me on my shit. I want you guys to be able to tell me when you think I'm incorrect, even if I don't like it. I also want to be seen as somebody who's helping and someone who is intelligent. And I struggle with that a lot. Some of that, when in the Discord, for example, is a worry that if I post the wrong thing or say the wrong thing, it's going to get clipped, it's going to be put out of context, and it's going to be those same fucking screenshots that have been posted around by about every fucking YouTuber. I mean, fuck, I had a conversation in PMs about one of the previous spicy takes I had, kind of talking about it in regards to like a monster thing, realizing that the actual trope didn't work, and then freaking out for 2 days because I was like, oh God, this could be totally taken out of context. I struggle with this stuff. And so part of that struggle is I would like to see people be able to engage and support and be honest about things. And I think expertise should be supported. I also don't really trust myself. My inability to read, my inability to, and not read, but you know what I mean. My inability to kind of stay on a topic or stay focused. I really struggle with feeling incompetent. There are, for example, some brilliant motherfuckers in our server. And I have to be very careful because I'll get intimidated. No joke. Like, I will just get intimidated. And so, yeah, I guess I feel like this is something I struggle a lot with, that imposter syndrome is this thing that is by its nature. Guess what? We're in them. This is distorted thinking. Yeah, no, lots of love to Tova. Tova's, I'm just going to say it on stream. I don't give a fuck. Tova's family, except for certain people, kind of garbage, just saying. Love to your brother and your sister-in-law, but the rest can burn, as far as I care, in roadblocks. I do not believe in political violence. I believe in playing roadblocks. Anyway, the problem with imposter syndrome is, for me, is that I can look at my degree, I can look at this channel, I can hear from my partner, I can see the wide eyes from people who listen to this stuff and the really amazing comments we get. And all it takes is one comment that is just so bad faith, so much, and it just tears me down. Now, I don't see those comments. If someone has a really good critique, then it gets left up and that's fine. But the ones that are just out and out attacks and all that, I don't see, because my mental health matters. But I need you guys to understand that this is a really hard thing. It also occurs in the context of mental illness and its treatment. Certain individuals may see themselves as less depressed, less anxious than their peers or other mentally ill people, citing their lack of severe symptoms as indication of no or minor underlying issues. So I'm going to call something out really fucking quick. Trigger warnings for internalized transphobia and sexual assault. Still here? Cool. I have heard clients under so many different situations invalidate themselves, almost to some degree self-gaslight. Yes, if you get triggered by this conversation, please take a break. You can always come back to the video or ask someone in chat to give you a synopsis. Thank you. Please take care of you. We love you and we want you okay. I've had people who were victims of sexual assault inform me that they didn't think it was that bad because the guy wasn't the guy jumping out of the bushes. The person is the person who, they knew, and maybe if they had done this right or they done this differently, all of that shit is really, really rough. I'm not sure why it went blurry. Hopefully it'll fix itself. But the problem is that there are people who go through this stuff, me included. I'll give myself as an example. As I've said on this channel before, I am a survivor of childhood sexual abuse. I was abused by one of my female cousins, when I was 5. And one of the things that was really, really fucking intense for me is that back when I identified as male, I never let myself say that I was a survivor. I never let myself go there. And the reason for that was that, at least to some degree, I struggled because I thought to myself, didn't mean anything, right? Boys are always sexual. Boys, you know, all the greatest hits, folks, right? And so, for years, going on several decades now, I essentially just convinced myself that I was not a survivor. I mean, I knew it cognitively. I could tell you that I was a survivor, but I couldn't articulate it as someone who had been through that. Oh yeah, like I wasn't hurt in my experiences either. I didn't get damaged. I didn't get damaged, at least, obviously, but the cousin who did this was female, and if I'm understanding the order of operations, sorry, I got a hair in my mouth. Ugh. If I'm understanding the order of operations, they were also a survivor of abuse by a family friend who was male, older adult. And the things that happened to me were them essentially reenacting that. Come to find out several years later, I would do the same. The pattern of fucking abuse keeps moving forward. Often by kids who don't know any better and who really mean no harm. The problem with sexual abuse is that it absolutely twists people. And it's especially worse when you don't fucking actually, are able to, acknowledge it. So I, for years, didn't acknowledge what happened to me. I basically just was like, yeah, that happened. I mean, granted, it took me years in therapy to even admit that that was abuse. Because I didn't want to. One, it would speak very poorly of my actions as a kid. But also, it would speak very horribly about the fact, let's be super clear, it would speak very poorly of the fact that I somehow was victimized like all of the other women in my family who I tried to not be like and also tried to be strong enough to protect. So after years of therapy, I finally figured that out. Didn't still quite click. Come out as a trans girl, all of a sudden the whole fucking thing unravels because there's no longer the blockade of being male. All of a sudden, under the framework of being a woman, because of the way I'd been encultured by my family, all of a sudden, yeah, I realized that I realized that this is something that happened to me and something I didn't deserve. But for years, I didn't believe that what happened to me was that bad. Having worked with people who had been abused or sexually assaulted in their adulthood, I never thought I was that bad. This is the thing that sucks about mental health, is that it's so easy to see when someone else is using these distorted thoughts. It's so fucking hard to notice it with yourself. Too true, Brittany, too true. So, for me, the imposter aspect was that I couldn't be as bad as that. I wasn't a girl that was hurt. I mean, now, as you're listening to this, you can probably hear that there's levels of internalized sexism. Those are there. Women in my family were primarily victims, and the men in my family were particularly perpetrators. The two together make a really fucked up sexist worldview. One that I took a long time to actually break out of. I relate to the imposter syndrome when it comes to mental health. Friends around me had gone through a lot of trauma, thus I couldn't have depression because my trauma wasn't that severe. Yeah, I mean, depression can literally be clinically devastating, and people will tell themselves that it's not that deep. Yeah, wow. Yeah, went a little bit more in depth with myself than I planned. Fuck it. So, but yeah, I mean, my ADHD, I would imposter syndrome my shit out of that and be like, you know what? Can't be that bad. I'm just whining. Wow, these people are listening to me. I'm doing this Dharma talk as a Zen priest, or I'm running a YouTube channel where people actually want to hear my opinions. I must be just bamboozling them. Maybe I just have nice tits. Maybe that's it. Maybe if they squint, I look enough like a girl that they're kind of turned on, but only if they squint. I have a million of them. Hell, the imposter syndrome of being trans. So many people in the server are validating, and there's just that always little part of my mind going, do they actually see me as a woman? I mean, that's true. My boobs do say trans rights. That's fair. Yes, absolutely. The whole thing of like the pain comparison shit is so fucking bad. You do have prestige? Prestige? Really? What? But like, and I hear that and I appreciate it, but like I'll post selfies in the thing and like all of a sudden I'll be like, I really like that picture of me. And 5 seconds later, like there's just suddenly this like moment where I'm like, am I just being hug boxed? Well, and that the whole comparison thing is fucking built into the Protestant work ethic and the idea of goodness and all sorts of awful American shit. Not to mention, if I want to be really spicy, I think that something about capitalist society also tends to make people feel incompetent because then they're going to strive more and work harder. Right? No, I agree, love. We should probably wrap it up. So I guess...
you.
I love you too. So, I struggle with this a lot. And you can see there are a number of ways why. I don't want people to think this is me trying to, like, bilk sympathy. It's to make it clear that you can literally have a fucking master's degree. You can fucking be a recognized priest in an order. You can be someone who has had friends of 20 years who love and trust you and are willing to support and hear you when you're struggling. And the degree is meaningless. The priesthood's super meaningless. And you don't tell the friends shit because you don't seem like you're that fucking important. So yeah. Imposter syndrome is distorted thinking because what it does is it erases who you are and what you're accomplishing. Does that mean people with expertises are perfect? No. Does that mean they can't be wrong? No. Does it mean that in general circumstances, I'm probably going to be more likely right than not? Probably, but I still make mistakes. Hell, my colleagues call me on these all the time. I love you guys, and I want you to understand this thing because as we go through more and more of the distorted thinking series, I didn't realize until I midway through this fucking thing that this was a distorted thought, that this stuff matters, all right? And we have to work against it. And sometimes with that, we need to, first off, listen to Sin, breathe more. Second off, we need to, if need be, ask for support. One of the things that has been an incredible blessing for me, God, I hate saying that. I sound like the whitest bitch. Anyway, fuck it.
My pale vampire.
Just start drinking fucking pumpkin spice, whatever. Saying that I feel blessed about the fact that the people in the server are so wonderful. We have people from different servers that came here because their community shattered. We have people who came here because they were dragged to filth online by previous people, and they come here and they trust me, at least to some degree. I am blessed to know so much really cool shit, and people genuinely seem supportive of a lot of stuff that I deal with and a lot of stuff that I struggle with. The whole kink at pride thing, which we'll cover later tonight. I had some pretty spicy takes until we cleaned it up, and yeah, I was supported. People were willing to engage with me. So anyway, I'm going to cut this one short here. Donation links are down below. Patreon's down below. You'll hear all that stuff at the end. And see you next one.